Hello and welcome to part 2 of Rydin the Spyder in the Hylands. And yes, before anyone corrects me, I do know how to spell the word Hylands. I just thought it would be a clever play on words to spell it the way I did. In this video, I'm, as I said, in the second part, and you'll have seen that I went round, I guess it's probably the back of Bowral, and then over the railway line, and I'm on a road now that I can't tell you the name of, but about a minute and a half into this video, I will come to a T intersection where this road joins the old Hume Highway, and then taking a left-hand turn, go down into the historic town or village, I'm not sure what the right word is, of Berrima, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on when I get to it. But in the last video, you'll recall that I spoke a lot about motorcycle safety, and I talked about a traffic incident that I was involved in, which was fairly minor, and so I don't want to labour the point there, but I do want to just make one more point about it, and that is that I did not intend to, and I hope I haven't given the impression that motorcycle safety is entirely the province and entirely the responsibility of car drivers, because it's not. I've made some other videos before where I've spoken about what I think are the responsibilities of motorcyclists in terms of ensuring their own safety. I've talked about making sure that you wear the appropriate PPE or safety gear, whatever you want to call it, that you are visible and that your bike is visible, and that's especially important obviously in the evening and even in the late afternoon when it's coming on to that time around dusk where there are shadows and it's grey and it's getting dark, but it's not quite dark enough now for everyone to put their lights on. That fashion that motorcycles have, some motorcycles have now, especially big cruisers, of being all black, makes them difficult to see. So the motorcyclist has a responsibility of wearing the safety gear, making sure the motorcycle they're riding is visible, and then of course making sure that they're riding in a safe manner. I've spoken before about this compact that I say exists between everybody on the road. Basically, we all want to start out at point A, go to point B, and then get back to point A safely. We want to take ourselves and our family or whomever that's in our vehicle or on our bike with us to wherever we're going and get back home safely and have an enjoyable time. That doesn't matter whether you're doing your daily commute or you're having a recreational ride as I am here. You still want it to be enjoyable and safe. Motorcycling, for the people who do it, is always enjoyable but not always safe. So we've all agreed that we do things like drive to the speed limit, right on the left side of the road. Most of us agree not to drink and drive or drive while we're affected by alcohol and so on. So we've all agreed to that part, but the motorcyclists, as I say, have some responsibilities themselves. Make sure that you're visible, make sure your bike is visible, make sure you're riding to the road rules, ride to the road conditions and the weather conditions, ride to your own capabilities, ride to the capabilities of your bike, and just because you're in a pack with other guys that are, or other people who may be riding faster than you are or whatever, that doesn't necessarily require you to ride faster. It requires you to ride according to your own abilities and as safely as you possibly can. And if you're 10 minutes late to the next coffee stop, well, hopefully people will wait for you, or before you set off, you've all planned where you're going to go and where you're going to meet up. So without labouring that point any further, that's what I have to say about motorcycles and motorcycle safety. Now, I said that about a minute and a half into this video I would turn on to the old Hume Highway and then go through the historic town of Berrima. It's historic because it's one of the early settlements on the southern highlands of New South Wales. That's that area just north of Goulburn. It's historic because there's an historic jail there and a Surveyor General pub, which is, I think, a very popular watering and dining place. The jail isn't used as a jail any longer. In fact, I think the government recently sold it. I'm not sure what it's been turned into. Maybe it'll be turned into an Airbnb or something. The Surveyor General, as I say, is a popular place for people to stop, and I don't know if they serve dinner, but I know they serve lunch. And Berrima itself, I suspect, started up as a settlement for pastoralists people who farmed the land for, at that point it would have been sheep for wool and perhaps beef cattle, and a settlement grew up around there. Now it's more of a sort of boutique or hobby type town where there are people who live permanently, but there are a lot of people who have businesses there that are only open on the weekends, artisanal type goods like jams and those sort of things, specialist breads, 100 varieties of olive oil. There are some vineyards nearby, so I'm assuming that their products are also sold there. And it's a place where people from Sydney often come on the weekend and think they're going to the country, so they're going to Berrima to buy these sort of artisanal goods, I think is the best way of describing them. I've been through it quite a few times over the years, and almost every time I go through there are motorcyclists there as well, either at the pub or the other big eating place, which is on the left-hand side, a bit further south of the pub. I suspect that, again, it's motorcyclists travelling from Sydney who looking for a day out. They go there, stop and have lunch, and then they take a loop around to get back to Sydney, either down through to Moss Vale and then down Wollongong and back up through Sydney. So I'm not sure how they do it all, but it's an historic town and it's a very popular place on weekends, and finding a parking space sometimes there on the weekend can be quite challenging. So that's the town of Berrima. Now, just beyond there, going south again, the slip road joins the dual carriageway and heads south to Goulburn and onwards to basically all the way to Melbourne. So you'll have probably, by the point where I'm talking about now, you'll have seen that I've joined the Hume Highway again, or the Hume motorway. It's a two-lane dual carriageway. There are 2 lanes going south and 2 lanes going north, and it's separated by a pretty wide dividing strip in most parts. And it's the main arterial road between Australia's 2 biggest cities, that is Sydney and Melbourne. It's the road where most of the road freight goes between those 2 cities, so it's not uncommon to see trucks all the time on that road. Only a couple of years ago, the dual carriageway was completed all the way to the Victorian border, so that towns like Gundagai and then Holbrook and Tarcutta and so on were all bypassed, and now you can, if you take the right road. So once you get on the motorways in Sydney, the M5 and the M7 are the 2 that lead south or southwest. You can almost go from, once you get on those motorways, and parts of them are toll roads, let's not forget, but once you get on them, you can go all the way to Victoria and all the way to almost to the outer suburbs of Melbourne without encountering a single traffic light. You will find some speed cameras along the way, and you will find some average speed cameras, those big gantries where they measure the time it took you to pass between 2 of them and work out the speed you were going. So you'll find those, but you won't find any traffic lights. So the dual carriageway is where my bike in particular comes into its own, because you can get into top gear pretty quickly, top gear being 5th gear on this bike. Later models they added a 6th gear and made the engine a bit bigger, and I think that made for better fuel efficiency. The engine doesn't lack for power or acceleration, but I think the increasing it from 1,000 to a 1330 and also making it a triple instead of a twin probably made it run a bit smoother and certainly gave it a little bit more power. But I think that the extra gear, especially for the highway, probably added to fuel efficiency. But as I said, once you get on the dual carriageway, this is where this bike really comes into its own. It is a touring bike. I think the RT stands for Road Tourer. So you get on, you get up to your speed. I have mine set at about 105. You set the cruise control, and away you go. And the speedo, there's an analog speedo with a needle. There's a digital printout or digital readout on the info screen in the middle of the dashboard, and I have my GPS on just to make sure it's operating. And they all say that I was travelling around 103 to 105 kilometres. So what I'm saying is the analog speedo is reasonably accurate, and the digital readout's pretty close to it, based on what the GPS says. Now, I set mine at 105 so I can avoid any issues with the constabulary. while I'm driving. I don't feel like I want to give them any extra money, give the state government any extra money for speeding fines, so I put mine a little bit below the maximum speed limit. Remember that in Australia, except in the Northern Territory, the maximum speed limit in all roads is 110 kilometres. Now in the Northern Territory, I think it's 135 because the roads are there's less traffic on their roads, and a lot of places you go for literally hundreds and hundreds of kilometres and you won't see a car. But the rest of the states and territories, the speed limit's 110. So you get on the dual carriageway, you put on your cruise control, turn up the tunes, and you just enjoy the scenery. And I hope, whilst you're not actually riding here, you're having an opportunity to see the scenery and enjoy it. So we're heading into the southern tablelands now. I think Berrima is probably about 60 k's or so from Goulburn, and heading south towards Goulburn. Considering that we're in summer, there's lots of greenery around. It's been a really wet summer this year. 2022 was a year of probably unprecedented rainfall in most parts of eastern Australia. There were floods all up and down the east coast, particularly in Queensland and the north coast of New South Wales. So whilst there weren't major flooding areas in and around Goulburn and in the area that I'm riding in now, everything's lovely and green. And fortunately, we've been very fortunate this summer that there hasn't been any major bushfire threats. But of course, all the fire chiefs are now talking about, well, all this rain and all this growth we've had is going to present a problem next summer if we don't get on with it now and get onto it fairly quickly and start clearing and making fire breaks and all that sort of stuff. So travelling down the Hume Highway south towards Goulburn. As I said, the next town or settlement, village, whatever you come to, is Marulan. You don't actually go into Marulan, but at the northern approach to Marulan is the truck weighbridge. And I think most of what happens there now is done electronically. They're mostly checking for vehicles overweight, and they just roll across a rolling road or something and record the mass of the vehicle and the number plate. And with those average speed cameras that I mentioned earlier that are on the highway, there are a couple of those between Sydney and Goulburn. It's pretty easy to work out if somebody's been exceeding the speed limit by getting between two of those faster than they anticipate you should. And then I suppose what happens is that either the trucking company just gets a fine for someone exceeding the speed limit, and then they pass it on to the driver who they can identify was driving that truck that day. That's getting a little bit off the topic of talking about riding down the Southern Highlands and talking about motorcycle safety and so on. But I hope you're enjoying the scenery and enjoying the commentary and giving you some idea of the sorts of things that I think about while I'm riding. The Hume motorway, or the Hume Highway, the Hume Freeway, I don't know what name it goes by at the moment, Highway 31 I think it is a pretty good road in the sense that, as I said, it's two lanes either way, dual carriageway, well separated by nature strips and so on. Obviously because it's two lanes, it's well marked where the lanes are. It also has that, I'm not sure how the word to describe, I think it's corrugated stripping on the shoulders or on the edges of the road, so that you know if you're sort of getting a bit dopey and dreamy, you're going to go across this corrugated stripping and it's going to make an annoying sound and perhaps wake you up. And the shoulders are pretty wide, and of course they have those white posts down the side of the road as well. Most of the places it's pretty safe to pull over on the shoulder, but as with any of those, anytime you pull over, especially on a two-wheeled bike, when you put the stand down, make sure that it's the banking isn't too steep so you can get the bike up off the stand again, and if possible, step off onto the the shoulder side of the road rather than the road side of the road. In other words, if you step off your bike onto the right-hand side, you're stepping off onto the road. If you step off onto the left-hand side of your bike, you'll be stepping off so that your bike at least will be between you and any traffic. Whichever way it is you do it, make sure it's safe to do it. Look over your shoulder first of all, check your mirror, and so on. There are a number of places to stop, just roadside stops, a couple of places where there are toilets and things like that if you need to stop, but there are also a couple of service centres along the way. One is at Pheasant's Nest, which is well before any of the strip of the road I'm on today. The other one is at what's a place called Sally's Corner, and at Sally's Corner there's a McDonald's on either side of the road. There's a Shell Servo and I think it's called the Coolabah Cafe on the left hand or the southern side. I think there's only McDonald's on the other side, but there's certainly a couple of food options there. And then there is the next service centre, which is at Marulan, where there are a couple of BP roadhouses on either side of the road and petrol stations and so on. So you have plenty of roadside stops, you have plenty of places to stop for fuel, and I think, certainly in the case of the Sally's Corner, the northbound lanes, the service station on the northbound side of the highway has some electric vehicle chargers as well. I'm not sure if there are any at either of the BP service stations, but while we're talking about electric vehicles for the moment, when you come into Goulburn, there's a place called the Gateway, which is a service station and cafe restaurant at the northern end of town across the road from McDonald's. So it's north of McDonald's at the northern entrance to Goulburn. There are electric vehicle chargers there. They're the NRMA fast chargers as far as I know. And as well as that, in Goulburn at the Tourist Information Office, there are 4 Tesla electric vehicle chargers and 1 other electric vehicle charger at the Tourist Information Office. You can see here as I'm talking about how wide the shoulders are, and in some cases there are also slip roads that come come onto the highway there, so always be careful about those, and if necessary change lanes so that you and the driver of the vehicle coming down onto the highway have got plenty of room to continue their journey. Now we're coming close to the end of this video, so once again I'll say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to me. I hope that you've enjoyed the commentary and the scenery, and we'll pick it up in the next video, which will probably take me all the way back to Goulburn. So thank you for watching and listening, and I will talk to you again when I'm preparing the next video. Catch you next time, as some people say.